Before the Death Star ever fired a single shot, and long before the Empire was even an idea, the most powerful weapon in galactic history was already floating silently in space. And the wildest part of this whole story is that almost nobody in the galaxy had any clue what it actually was. Now we need to go back, way back. Around 100,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, something was built that changes how you look at the entire Star Wars timeline. That is roughly 75,000 years before the Galactic Republic even existed. There were no Jedi yet. There was no Sith Order yet. And in that ancient era, a machine was constructed that would remain the oldest known superweapon in the entire galaxy. It may even be the oldest intact artifact anywhere in known space. The galaxy would come to call it Centerpoint Station. So, who built it? The physical labor came from an insectoid species called the Killiks, specifically the Tharut hive. The Killiks shared a hive mind, a collective consciousness that connected all of them together. But the Killiks were not working alone. They were following the direction of two godlike beings known as Celestials. These two beings were the son and the daughter, and the Killiks had their own name for them. They called them the Architects, and the way this partnership worked is genuinely one of the strangest things in Star Wars lore. The son and the daughter physically joined the Killik hive mind. They became what were known as joiners, fully connected members of the collective. And through that connection, they poured their staggering power in the Force directly into the entire hive. Suddenly, these insects could do things that should have been impossible. They pulled ore straight out of asteroids and smelted it. They moved themselves through open space with no ships and no propulsion of any kind. The Force alone carried them. An entire species became a living construction crew powered by two gods. What they built was enormous beyond belief. The finished station stretched roughly 220 miles from end to end. To put that in perspective, that is more than twice the diameter of the first Death Star. And the Death Star would not exist for another 100,000 years. The Killiks gave the station a name in their own language. They called it Kolaralok. It translates to the world puller. And that name was completely literal. At the heart of Centerpoint sat a hyperspace tractor repulsor. This worked on the same basic principle as the tractor beam on any starship, except scaled up to a level that defies understanding. It was coupled to hyperspace itself, which meant the station could reach across light years, grab an object as massive as a planet or even a star, and drag it wherever the Celestials wanted it to go. Nothing ever had to cross the distance. There was no projectile to intercept and no fleet to shoot down. The station reached out and moved worlds, and the Celestials used it exactly that way. Centerpoint assembled the entire Corellian system artificially. It seized 5 habitable planets, including Corellia itself, pulled them through hyperspace, and arranged them in stable orbits around the star Corel. One of the most famous star systems in all of Star Wars did not form naturally. It was built. But the station performed an even more frightening feat than that. The Killiks used Centerpoint to drag numerous black holes across space and cluster them tightly together near Kessel. That cluster became known as the Maw, and it was created for one purpose. It was a prison, a cage made entirely of black holes built to contain a chaos entity called Abeloth. The Celestials were responsible for other massive projects in this era too, including the Hapes Cluster and the Cosmic Turbine in the Vultar system. But Centerpoint was the crown jewel, and it was the only one that survived intact into the modern age. Then the Builders disappeared. All traces of the Celestials were gone from the galaxy by roughly 30,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. And Centerpoint just sat there, parked at the balance point between the twin worlds of Talos and Tralos in the Corellian system, humming quietly for thousands upon thousands of years while its purpose was completely forgotten. By the modern era, people were actually living inside of it. The interior of the station held a hollow chamber nearly 40 miles wide called Hollowtown, lit by an artificial fusion sun known as the Glow Point. There were farms in there. There were estates and whole generations of colonists who raised their families inside this thing, and none of them had any idea they were living inside a loaded gun. In 18 ABY, during the Corellian crisis, the truth came out in the worst possible way. A secret cabal triggered a hidden function of the station called the Starbuster. Centerpoint could fire a hyperspace repulsor pulse at a starlight years away and cause that star to go supernova. When the weapon charged up, the glow point flared to an annihilating intensity, and everything inside Hollowtown was destroyed in moments. The colonists who lived within the station became its very first victims. The Starbuster plot then wiped out entire star systems. The star Thantazilbra was detonated along with another distant star, and thousands of lives were lost. More targets were queued up on a broadcast timetable, including the Bovo-Yagin system, which was home to millions of people. On top of all that, the station generated an interdiction field across the entire Corellian sector, shutting down all hyperspace travel in or out and trapping the New Republic response fleets on the outside. And after everything, the weapon was finally stopped by a child. Young Anakin Solo, the Force prodigy son of Han and Leia, had a unique affinity for the station. He interfaced with its ancient systems, and Centerpoint effectively attuned itself to him personally. That attunement came back to haunt everyone. In 25 ABY, during the Yuuzahn Vong invasion, Thrakan Sal Solo pushed to fire Centerpoint at the invaders. Anakin wrestled with the ethics of a weapon that could not tell friend from enemy, and he refused to activate it. So Thrakan fired it himself using Anakin's earlier attunement. The shot arrived off target at Fondor and tore through both sides at once, wiping out most of the Hapan Royal Navy along with part of the Vong fleet. Tens of thousands of Allied lives were erased in a single discharge. Then in 40 ABY, during the Second Galactic Civil War, a resurgent Corellia repaired the station and recalibrated it to respond to the bloodline of Jacen Solo, setting off a desperate scramble between the galaxy's major powers. The Jedi Coalition decided that no one could be trusted with the World Puller. A strike team sabotaged its systems, and when the station attempted to fire, it tore itself apart in a cataclysmic explosion that sent shockwaves through the Corellian system. That moment is considered the turning point of the entire war. 4 years later, Jedi visited the Tharut Hive and witnessed the living histories of the Killiks, finally confirming where Centerpoint came from after 100,000 years of mystery. Every superweapon that came after it was an imitation of scale. This was the original, and the galaxy never learned who its makers truly were or where they went. The Celestials vanished and left their machines behind. But about 70,000 years after Centerpoint was finished, a new power rose up in the galaxy, and this one had a very different idea of what a superweapon should be. This is the story of the Starforge. And what makes the Starforge so disturbing is that it never cracked a planet and never fired a super laser, yet it may have caused more suffering than any battle station ever built. The species behind it was called the Rakata. Around 30,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Rakata ruled what they called the Infinite Empire, the first great conquering civilization the galaxy had ever seen. They were brutal in a way that is hard to overstate. They swept across the stars, took whatever they wanted, and imprisoned entire worlds along the way. Places you know very well were under their control. Coruscant answered to them. Korriban answered to them. Even Kashyyyk was theirs. And here is a detail that most fans never learn. The giant Rosha trees that cover the Wookiee homeworld were seeded by the Rakata as an agricultural experiment. The forests of Kashyyyk are, in legends, leftover infrastructure of this ancient empire. What truly set the Rakata apart was their technology. It did not run on fuel or reactors the way normal machines do. Rakatan technology ran on the Force itself, and specifically on the dark side. Their entire civilization was powered by darkness. And the peak of that civilization was a station they built in orbit of the star in the Lahon system, directly above their homeworld of Rakata Prime. They positioned it there for a reason. The Starforge was designed to siphon raw stellar matter straight out of the sun. It was an automated shipyard fed by the mass of a star. Actually, calling it a shipyard undersells what this thing was. The Starforge was a hybrid of machine and organism, a fusion of Rakatan engineering and the Force. It fed on two things at once. It drew matter from the star to use as raw material, and it drew dark side energy from its users for direction and power. The output was effectively limitless. Give the Forge enough aggression and enough dark side will, and it would churn out warships, fighters, droids, and endless war material with no crews and no laborers. Think about the difference between a bomb and a factory that produces bombs forever. That is the archetype the Starforge represents. It was a machine that made destruction infinite, the single greatest military asset in galactic history. But the Forge came with a catch that its own builders never fully understood. It was semi-sentient and it was hungry. Even while it served its masters, it amplified their aggression, their paranoia, and their ambition, feeding on that darkness the entire time. Rakatan accounts describe the station demanding dark side energy while it was still being assembled. The Infinite Empire poured hatred into its construction as deliberately as they poured in metal, which is why later Jedi scholars classified the Forge as a colossal dark side artifact. The Rakata believed they had built a tool. What they had actually created was a parasite, and that parasite helped destroy them. The cruelty of the Rakata was inflamed by the very machine that armed them. Then, around 25,200 BBY, a genetic plague swept through the species and stripped away their Force sensitivity. Suddenly, an entire civilization could no longer operate its own technology. The Infinite Empire collapsed into civil war, and the survivors regressed into primitive tribes on their homeworld. The Starforge went dormant. For nearly 25,000 years, the greatest weapon factory ever constructed hung silent above Lehon, protected by an automated disruptor field that wrecked any ship foolish enough to approach. The Rakata did leave breadcrumbs behind, though. 5 ancient relics called star maps sat hidden on 5 worlds the Infinite Empire had once ruled. Dantooine held one. So did Tatooine, along with Kashyyyk, Manaan, and Korriban. Together, these maps revealed the location of the Forge. The network was essentially the imperial filing system of a fallen empire, left running for 25 millennia, while the galaxy forgot the Rakata ever existed. Then someone came looking. In the aftermath of the Mandalorian Wars, 2 Jedi Knights named Revan and Malak followed the trail of the star maps and found the Star Forge around 3959 BBY. And the discovery changed them. The dark side influence of the Forge accelerated a fall that was already underway. And the 2 heroes of the Mandalorian Wars returned to Republic space as Darth Revan and Darth Malak. The Forge became the engine of their new Sith Empire. Revan was smart about it. He was wary of the corrupting hunger inside the station, so he deliberately ran it at reduced capacity. Even throttled down, it generated fleets fast enough for a splinter force of former Jedi to fight the entire Galactic Republic to a standstill in the Jedi Civil War. Then came the betrayal. Malak turned his guns on his own master's flagship and left Revan behind, believing his former friend was finished. With Revan gone, Malak ran the Star Forge at far greater output with none of his master's caution. He mass-produced fleets, and he went even further than that. He used the dark energies of the Forge to twist captured Jedi into obedient dark Jedi servants. His Forge built ships leveled the world of Taris in 3956 BBY, leaving a whole planet in rubble. But Revan had survived. The Jedi wiped his memory, retrained him, and set him on a path he did not even recognize as his own. In 3956 BBY, the redeemed Revan retraced his old steps through all 5 star maps and led the Republic straight back to Lehon for the endgame of the war. These are the events of Knights of the Old Republic. At the Battle of Rakata Prime, the Republic fleet, under Admiral Thorn Dodonna, threw itself against the station while endless waves of Sith ships poured out to meet it. And the Sith had a weapon of their own inside the Forge. Bastila Shan, a Jedi captured and turned by Malak, possessed a rare gift called battle meditation. Her power boosted the coordination and morale of an entire fleet while sapping the will of the enemy. Aboard the station, she functioned as a component of the superweapon itself, which is why the entire strategy of both sides revolved around one woman. Revan boarded the Forge, reached Bastila, and brought her back to the light. Then he confronted Malak in the heart of the station. In his desperation, Malak drained the life energy from captive Jedi suspended in stasis around him to sustain his own strength. It was the vampiric philosophy of the Star Forge made flesh. Revan struck him down anyway. With battle meditation now flipped to the Republic side, Dodonna's fleet broke through and bombarded the station until it came apart. 30,000 years of history was blasted into pieces, and the wreckage of the Star Forge fell into the Star of Lehon, swallowed by the very sun that had fed it. Even in destruction, its shadow stretched forward. Rakatan Force technology from the same lineage kept resurfacing across legends, from the ruins on Lihon studied in the Old Republic era to Rakatan mind prisons and scattered artifacts. The Infinite Empire became the half-remembered foundation buried underneath all later galactic superscience, and the pattern it established was about to repeat. Because the next weapon on this timeline was also lost, also forgotten, and also waiting for someone willing to dig it back up. Picture an army standing on a battlefield, watching the horizon go quiet. The grass withers, the trees curl inward, and a towering machine walks toward them, pulling the life out of everything it passes before a single shot is ever fired. That machine was real in the Star Wars galaxy, and its name was the Dark Reaper. The Reaper was born around 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, during the era of the Great Hyperspace War. The Sith Empire assembled it in an armory on Thule, a fortress world buried deep in Sith space, which makes it the oldest true Sith superweapon in all of Legends. And even by Sith standards, the way this thing operated was uniquely horrifying. The Dark Reaper did not open with lasers or missiles. It drained the living force out of anyone within its radius. Soldiers and civilians alike collapsed as their life energy was pulled from their bodies. Animals dropped where they stood. Entire forests withered in place. And all of that harvested life became the ammunition, because the Reaper converted the energy it collected into devastating offensive beams. The weapon fed on its victims first, and then fired what it took from them. At the heart of the machine sat its engine, the Force Harvester. This was a colossal swirling globe of purple energy crowned on top of a towering Sith War engine that moved on legs like a tripod. Armies described it as a walking cathedral of the dark side, and there was almost nothing anyone could do about it. Conventional shields meant absolutely nothing to the Harvester. Armor plating meant nothing either. The drain attacked life directly instead of vehicles, so the only real defenses were staying far away or being something the Force could not touch. Keep that last part in mind, because a strange flaw was built right into the design. The Force Harvester could not drain a wound in the Force. That detail sounds like a footnote right now, but it connects directly to two of the darkest entries still ahead on this timeline. And there was one more cruel twist in how the weapon worked. The stronger your connection to the Force, the richer a fuel source you became. Jedi were the most vulnerable beings on any battlefield the Reaper walked across, and the machine reportedly claimed a great number of them. The greatest strength of the Jedi Order had been turned into a target painted on its back. After the Great Hyperspace War ended, the Dark Reaper was lost to history. It stayed lost for roughly 1,000 years until the Great Sith War erupted in 3996 BBY. A fallen Jedi named Exar Kun had been excavating ancient Sith ruins on Yavin 4, and through those digs he rediscovered the secrets of the weapon. Another fallen Jedi named Ulic Kel Droma was the one who actually put it into the field. But powering the Reaper demanded something monstrous. The machine needed enormous amounts of energy, so the forces under Ulic deliberately aimed it at the living force of populated areas. They were feeding whole worlds into the machine just to keep it running. With the Reaper at his command, Ulic subjugated a large stretch of space around the Empress Teta system, and when he unleashed it on the Republic staging world of Raxus Prime, thousands of lives were lost in one deployment. So how do you stop something like that? The answer came from the conscience of the man who commanded it. Ulik was eventually captured and stripped of his connection to the Force entirely. And after his fall was over, he told the Jedi exactly how to defeat the machine he had wielded. Armed with his information, a Jedi task force struck the Dark Reaper at its source on Thule and shut it down. But then the Jedi faced a problem that echoes through this whole series. Some weapons cannot be destroyed safely. They can only be buried. So the Order broke the Reaper into components and scattered the pieces across multiple planets. The Force Harvester itself, the beating heart of the whole system, was hidden beneath the endless garbage of the junk world Raxus Prime. The hope was that it would stay under that toxic trash forever. For nearly 4,000 years, it worked. The Harvester sat buried through the Jedi Civil War, through the fall of the old Sith Empire, and through a full millennium of galactic peace. Then came 22 BBY and the outbreak of the Clone Wars. Count Dooku was a Sith Lord steeped in ancient lore, and he launched a coordinated separatist operation that history calls the Dark Reaper Campaign. His plan was to dig the Harvester back up, reassemble the ancient weapon, and use it to break the Republic. His opening move confused everyone. Separatist forces assaulted Ren-Var, a frozen world with seemingly no strategic value at all. But the attack was actually a raid on a tomb. Ulik Qel-Droma had spent his final redeemed years in exile on Ren-Var, and the records within his resting place held the key to locating and reactivating the Reaper's systems. A warning left behind by a fallen Sith became the instruction manual for bringing his weapon back. From there, Dooku and his enforcer Sidon Prax excavated the Force Harvester out of the trash heaps of Raxus Prime and escaped with it just before Republic forces conquered the planet. Dooku wanted a test. He chose Alaris Prime, a forested moon in the Kashyyyk system, and the results were sickening. The activation wave swept away half of the moon's thriving forest, along with its Wookiee inhabitants, in moments. Anakin Skywalker was present as a captive during that test, and he barely outran the drain wave on a stolen stap. After that, Dooku took the Harvester on what can only be described as a feeding tour. He drained life energy on Mon Calamari and Agamar, then did the same on Bakura, all to charge the reassembled Reaper. Entire battlefronts of the early Clone Wars were secretly harvesting runs. The endgame came full circle at Thule, where the completed Dark Reaper now stood on the same world where it had been forged 5,000 years earlier. Mace Windu and Obi-Wan Kenobi led the Republic assault, and Anakin Skywalker was right there beside them. And it was Anakin who finished it. He climbed into an ancient Sith war machine, pushed through the Harvester's drain using nothing but raw Force strength, and destroyed the Dark Reaper personally. Resisting that pull should not have been possible, and it stands as one of the earliest hints in Legends of just how abnormal Anakin's power ceiling truly was. Sit with the irony of that moment for a second. The future Darth Vader personally took down a Sith superweapon powered by harvested life 23 years before serving a master whose entire arsenal would harvest life at industrial scale. Yoda gave the crisis its final word. He warned that the war was far from over, and he was more right than he knew. While the Republic celebrated the destruction of one Sith superweapon, another was already being designed in secret by its own government. The Dark Reaper also left the galaxy with a law that repeats across this entire timeline. These weapons are never truly destroyed. They are only buried. And somewhere down the line, there is always someone willing to dig. Every weapon we have covered so far was wielded by villains. The Rakata were conquerors. The Sith built the Reaper to feed on life. But this next superweapon was designed, built, and fired by the good guys. And that is exactly what makes it the most haunting entry on this entire timeline. The year was 3960 BBY, and the Mandalorian Wars were reaching their breaking point. The Mandalorian clans had torn through the Outer Rim, committing atrocities on world after world, and the Republic was struggling to hold the line. Leading the Republic war effort was a Jedi Knight named Revan. Yes, that Revan. This all takes place before his discovery of the Star Forge, before his fall, back when he was still the greatest hero the Republic had. And serving under Revan was a Zabrak tech officer, a brilliant engineer named Bao-Dur. Bao-Dur had witnessed what the Mandalorians did to innocent worlds, and the hatred that grew inside him needed somewhere to go. So he poured it into a machine. He designed a device called the Mass Shadow Generator, and he would spend the rest of his life haunted by what he made. The Mass Shadow Generator worked differently from anything else in this video. It fired no beam and launched no projectile. It was a gravity weapon. When triggered, it generated catastrophic mass shadows that crushed everything within its radius, dragging warships, entire fleets, and even chunks of the planet beneath it into a ruinous gravitational vortex. There was no outrunning it and no shielding against it. Gravity reached up and pulled the battlefield down into itself. The weapon was placed at Malachor 5, a taboo world sitting on the edge of Mandalorian space. And this is where the story turns cold, because Malachor was the centerpiece of Revan's endgame. He engineered a final battle there on purpose. The goal was bigger than winning the war. Revan wanted to end the Mandalorians as a functioning civilization in a single stroke. But there was a second layer to his plan, and it is genuinely chilling. Revan seeded the Republic fleet at Malachor 5 with soldiers and Jedi whose loyalty he considered questionable. The battle would wipe out the Mandalorians and quietly purge his own ranks at the same time. The trap was the plan from the very beginning. When the moment came, the activation order did not come from Revan himself. It came from his top general, a Jedi who history would come to know as Mitra Surik. She gave the command, and Bao-Dur triggered the device he had built. Both of them lived with what happened next. The result went beyond every projection. The generator crushed the massive Mandalorian fleet and much of the Republic fleet together in the same instant. Malachor 5 itself shattered. The planet was left a broken, fractured husk surrounded by a graveyard of wrecked warships. And it is worth understanding why this event stands alone on this list. The weapon was not fired at some helpless world. It was detonated in the middle of the largest naval engagement of the entire war, with both armadas fully committed. Thousands of lives, many of them force-sensitive, were extinguished in one shared instant of agony. That much loss, concentrated into a single moment, did something no weapon had ever done before. It tore a wound in the Force itself. The energy field connecting all living things actually recoiled from what happened at Malachor 5. Up until now, the superweapons in this series harmed bodies. This is the point in Legends where enough destruction in one place started harming the Force. And standing at the very center of it all was Mitra Surik. To survive being surrounded by that much agony, she instinctively severed her own connection to the Force. She became known as the Exile, a walking wound in the Force, and the protagonist of Knights of the Old Republic 2. Remember the flaw built into the Force Harvester, the one thing it could not drain. A wound in the Force. Mitra had just become exactly that. The battle accomplished everything Revan wanted. He defeated Mandalore the Ultimate in single combat and hid his mask, and with the fleet crushed at Malachor, the clans scattered across the galaxy. The mass shadow generator functionally ended the Mandalorian wars on the spot. The clans never forgot it either. For the next 4,000 years, Mandalorian culture remembered Malachor 5 as the cheat that ended their crusade, a grievance that echoes through Canderous Ordo's later rebuilding of the clans and their wary relationship with the Republic for centuries afterward. But victory left scars everywhere it touched. The broken surface of Malachor 5 became saturated with the dark side, a scar in space that hosted an ancient Sith teaching ground called the Trius Academy. Revan walked those halls after the war, and what he sensed there pulled him deeper into darkness and eventually out into the unknown regions. Malachor is the hinge connecting the Mandalorian wars to his fall, and through him to everything the Starforged later became. As for Bao-Dur, the moment his creation fired, the hatred inside him burned away completely. What remained was an engineer devoted to quiet penance, who later helped restore the ravaged world of Telos 4. There is a verdict on this weapon that gives the whole tragedy its meaning. In Knights of the Old Republic 2, the character Kreia describes Malachor 5 as the place where the Force itself could be heard crying out. And she argues that the true weapon was never the machine at all. The true weapon was the choice, made by soldiers who believed the ends justified the means. The Republic's greatest hero used a superweapon for what he considered the right reasons, and in doing so, he stepped onto the same road the Rakata had walked, the same road a certain Grand Moff would walk thousands of years later. The mass shadow generator fired one more time. In 3951 BBY, during the Second Battle of Malachor 5, the device was reactivated. And in a detail that says everything about this story, the reactivation was completed by Bao-Dur's remote, the small hovering droid he had built specifically to finish the job if organic hands failed. The most apocalyptic weapon of the era was triggered on both occasions by the gentlest character in it. This second activation crushed the broken planet into oblivion, erasing the Trius Academy and the wound at its heart. 2 activations in total. Both of them consumed the fleets, the battlefield, and the planet itself. Legends never produced a purer example of a one-use apocalypse. But Malachor 5 left one loose end behind, and it is the darkest one imaginable. Among the beings caught in the generator's activation was a survivor, a man who stood inside that vortex of shared agony and came out the other side changed into something the galaxy had no name for. His response to the horror was to become hunger itself, and soon enough, he stops being a survivor and becomes a superweapon with a heartbeat. Something walked out of the wreckage of Malachor 5. Not a ship and not a machine. A man, or at least something that used to be a man. Because the only superweapon on this entire list with a heartbeat was created the moment the mass shadow generator fired, and the galaxy would come to know him as Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger. Nihilus was not born a monster. He was made by a superweapon. He survived the activation at Malachor 5 in 3960 BBY, and he emerged from that cataclysm as something the galaxy had never seen before. A living wound in the Force. The catastrophe left him with an insatiable hunger for Force energy, and this was not hunger in some metaphorical Sith sense, the way other Dark Lords crave power. His need was physically real. Nihilus had to consume the life force of other beings just to continue existing. And here is the cruelest part of his condition. The hunger grew larger every single time he fed. Eating made him hungrier. Eventually, his body failed under the strain of what he had become. So to survive, Nihilus performed a ritual that bound his consciousness and his appetite into his mask and robes. By the time the wider galaxy learned his name, there was arguably no man left at all. What remained was pure will and pure hunger wearing a suit of armor. Even his voice stopped being language. Nihilus spoke in a distorted rasp that no one could understand, a sound that other beings felt as pressure and dread more than actual words. That sound became famous among fans as the signature of the most alien Sith Lord in all of Legends. He did not stay alone for long. On the broken surface of Malachor 5, at the Treyus Academy, a Sith Lord named Darth Traya found him and recruited him. You may know her better as Kriya. Together with a third Sith named Darth Sion, they formed what history calls the Sith Triumvirate. Each of them carried a title that told you exactly what they were. Traya was the Lord of Betrayal, Sion was the Lord of Pain, and Nihilus was the Lord of Hunger. Fittingly, betrayal is exactly what came next. Nihilus and Sion turned on their teacher, stripped Traya of the Force, and cast her out. With her gone, the two remaining lords directed a shadow campaign against the Jedi that history remembers as the First Jedi Purge, running from roughly 3954 to 3951 BBY. Their methods split cleanly down the middle. Sion hunted Jedi one at a time, using assassins and his own dark side immortality. Nihilus erased them by the world. His flagship tells you everything about him. Nihilus flew the Ravager, a shattered Centurion-class battlecruiser dredged up from the graveyard of wrecked warships surrounding Malachor 5. The ship was so ruined that it should not have been able to fly at all. It was held together not by repairs, but by the will of Nihilus and the Force itself. His crew were husks, beings drained nearly to nothing and imprisoned to keep the vessel moving. A broken lord commanding a broken ship crewed by broken people. Now you might be asking why a single Sith Lord belongs on a list of superweapons. The answer is simple and terrifying. Nihilus could perform planetary scale destruction with no fleet, no station, and no technology whatsoever. He could strip every living thing from the surface of a world by consuming it. Planet-ending destruction was his biology, and the proof came in 3952 BBY at a world called Qatar. The Jedi Order, already gutted by the recent wars, secretly gathered a conclave on Qatar, a colony world of the Miraluka. The Miraluka were a species of humans born without sight who perceived the world entirely through the Force, which meant the whole population was Force sensitive. To Nihilus, A planet full of Force sensitives was a banquet. He arrived in orbit and he fed. In one single act of consumption, the entire conclave of Jedi and virtually the whole Miraluka population were extinguished. An entire world of life gone in one feeding. Qatar was left a barren gray husk, and it stands as one of the most disturbing single events anywhere in Legends. Combined with Sion's assassins picking off the stragglers, the loss at Qatar reduced the known Jedi to a bare handful. 4,000 years before Order 66, the first Jedi Purge came within a hair of accomplishing the exact same thing. One being survived Qatar. A Miraluka woman named Visas Ma was left alive amid a lifeless world, and Nihilus claimed her as his shadow hand itself. She became his apprentice and his prisoner, and eventually the instrument of his downfall. Because Nihilus had a weakness, and it was the same thing that made him powerful. His hunger was also his cage. Worlds rich in Force energy called out to him, and he drifted between feedings with no strategy beyond appetite. Kreia understood this better than anyone. Nihilus was not waging a war. He was starving at galactic scale, and every world he drained deepened a silence spreading through the Force itself, a quiet that the Jedi could feel growing. Kreia considered him a threat to existence itself, far beyond a mere threat to the Order. That appetite is what finished him. In 3951 BBY, Nihilus was lured to Telos IV by the promise of a feast, a supposed gathering of Jedi on a world being deliberately reseeded with life after the bombardments of the Jedi Civil War. His final hunt targeted the single greatest symbol of healing in the galaxy because he intended to consume Telos itself. But the trap held nothing he could eat. When Nihilus tried to feed on Mitra Surik, the exile herself, the feeding backfired catastrophically. She was a wound in the Force just as he was. He was trying to devour a void, and the backlash of consuming nothingness crippled him. In that same moment, Visas Ma turned against her master. Confronted aboard the Ravager by the exile and by Mandalore himself, the warrior Canderous Ordo, Nihilus was struck down. His body dissolved into smoke and shadow, and proton charges sent the Ravager, the last relic of Malachor's graveyard fleet, into destruction along with him. Even then, the hunger lingered. His mask survived, and centuries later, Sith cults hunted his teachings and artifacts as relics of terrible power. In the records of the Jedi, Nihilus was remembered less as a historical figure and more as a cautionary void, a hole in the shape of a man. And take a step back to see what this story really is. One superweapon detonated at Malachor 5, and its most terrible piece of debris got up, put on a mask, and consumed worlds. But the Sith were far from finished experimenting with the idea that belief itself could be weaponized. Because roughly 3,000 years later, an army of them would gather in a cave and turn their own meditation into the single most frightening explosion in Star Wars history. "1,000 years before the events of the movies, a group of Sith Lords walked into a cave on a world called Yuuzahn. None of them ever walked out. What happened inside that cave ended a war overnight, created the version of the Sith that Palpatine would inherit, and left behind something so disturbing that it makes the Death Star look merciful. This is the story of the Thought Bomb. Everything we have covered so far had some physical form: a station, a factory, a machine, or at the very least, a man in a mask. The Thought Bomb had none of that. It was a forbidden Sith ritual, the ultimate expression of the dark side used as a weapon, a psychic detonation that consumed the life and the soul of every Force-sensitive being within its blast radius. There was no hardware to sabotage and no reactor to target. The weapon was made of meditation and hatred, and absolutely nothing else. Its moment arrived at the very end of the New Sith Wars, during the Yuuzahn campaign that ran from 1002 to 1000 BBY. 7 brutal battles were fought on that world between two armies. On one side stood Lord Hoth and his Jedi army of light. On the other stood Lord Kaan and his Sith Brotherhood of Darkness. The fate of the galaxy hung on the outcome. And moving quietly through the Brotherhood's ranks was its most dangerous mind, a man named Darth Bane. Bane had unearthed the thought bomb from ancient Sith knowledge, and he understood something that Kaan absolutely did not. If Kaan's Brotherhood performed this ritual, it would be suicide. What Bane did with that knowledge is one of the great long cons in all of Star Wars. Bane had come to believe that the Brotherhood of Darkness was a corruption of everything the Sith were supposed to be. An organization of supposedly equal Sith lords, in his view, diluted the dark side into weakness. So, he fed the thought bomb to Kaan deliberately. He handed his own leader a weapon he knew would destroy everyone who used it, engineering the Brotherhood's self-destruction so that his own vision of the Sith could rise from the ashes. By the 7th Battle of Yuuzahn, in 1000 BBY, the pieces had fallen exactly where Bane wanted them. Kaan's forces were cornered and psychologically shattered, and Kaan himself was fraying under battle madness. The forbidden last resort became the Brotherhood's actual plan. The ritual demanded collective sacrifice because no single Sith could power it alone. Kaan led his remaining Sith Lords down into a cave beneath the surface of Yuuzahn, a canyon complex the Sith had made their final redoubt, ground already soaked in a full campaign's worth of loss. The architects of the ritual believed that would amplify the blast. Inside, the assembled Brotherhood merged their dark side energies in meditation, winding the ritual toward critical mass. And on the surface above, Lord Hoth understood exactly what was coming. What he did next may be the grimmest decision any Jedi ever made. Hoth marched into that cave with a hand-picked group of Jedi companions, fully aware that none of them would leave. Their purpose was to confront Kaan directly and make certain the Sith detonated the bomb on themselves. They traded their lives to guarantee it. The detonation consumed every Force user in the region. Kaan and the entire assembled Brotherhood of Darkness were gone. Lord Hoth and roughly 100 Jedi of the Army of Light were gone with them. In one flash, the Force-wielding leadership of both sides ceased to exist. But the true horror of the thought bomb was what came after. The ritual did not end its victims. It ripped their spirits out of their bodies and imprisoned them, fully conscious, inside a swirling silver orb of energy suspended in that cave. Jedi and Sith alike, trapped together, aware, unable to leave. A clean ending would have been a mercy. This was a jar full of souls. On the surface, the effect was immediate. With the Brotherhood erased, the new Sith Wars ended overnight, and the Republic and the Jedi came to believe the Sith were extinct. That belief was exactly what Bane needed. The galaxy's 1,000-year blind spot, the one that ends with Palpatine, begins in that cave. Bane walked away from Yuuzahn with a single apprentice named Darth and founded the Rule of Two. From that day forward, there would be only 2 Sith at a time, a master and an apprentice, compounding power and secrecy in darkness for a millennium. The Thought Bomb is the literal birthplace of the Sith lineage that ends in Darth Sidious. And take in the irony of the whole thing. The bomb claimed the life of every single Sith who used it, and exactly 0 of the Sith it was supposedly protecting them from. Bane, the real threat, stood outside the blast radius the entire time, taking notes. The political shockwave stretched even further than the mystical one. By that 7th battle, Hoth's army had been filled out with barely trained recruits and even children elevated to Jedi in the war's desperation. The 100 who fell in the cave were the Order's veterans. Losing them pushed the survivors into sweeping changes known as the Yuuzahn Reformation. The Republic disbanded its standing armies, and the Jedi stepped back from their military role. That demilitarized galaxy, with no fleet ready when crisis came 1,000 years later, is the exact stage on which the Clone Wars begins. Politically speaking, the blast radius of the Thought Bomb was the entire prequel era, and the souls waited. Over the following centuries, the battlefield transformed into a nexus of trapped Force energy known as the Valley of the Jedi, and its location was lost to history. The spirits remained bound inside that orb from 1000 BBY all the way into the era of the Galactic Civil War, the longest-lasting active effect of any superweapon in Legends. Around 5 ABY, a dark Jedi named Jarek hunted the valley, intending to drain its trapped power and make himself something beyond even Palpatine. Standing in his way was a man named Kyle Katarn, whose father Morgan had lost his life at Jarek's hands for hiding the valley's location. Kyle defeated Jarek inside the valley itself, and the imprisoned spirits of Yuuzahn were finally freed after a full millennium. Legends never fully explains the mechanics of the Thought Bomb, and later Sith sources treat it as partially lost knowledge, which somehow makes it more unsettling. So the ledger of the ritual reads like this. Alongside Katar and Order 66, Yuuzahn stands among the great single-stroke losses of Jedi in Legends, and it is the only one of them the Jedi walked into knowingly. The deadliest weapons platform ever fielded in Star Wars turned out to be a sufficient number of Sith who agreed with each other. But the galaxy Bane left behind would not stay quiet forever. 1,000 years down the road, his lineage would finally spring its trap, and when open war returned to the stars, it came with machines again, enormous ones, and the first of them hunted in complete silence. In 22 BBY, entire Republic battle groups started disappearing. Dozens of warships would jump into a sector and never report back. No distress calls came through. No wreckage told a story. No survivors turned up to explain what happened. For weeks, the Republic was fighting a war against something it could not even name, and clone intelligence filed the reports under a mystery weapon. That mystery had a name, and it was the Malevolence. This was the flagship terror weapon of the early Clone Wars, a subjugator-class heavy cruiser of staggering scale. The ship, stretched roughly 3 miles from bow to stern, roughly 3 times the length of the Republic's own Star Destroyer-style warships of its day. But size alone is never what gets you on this list. What made the Malevolence a superweapon was mounted along its sides. 2 colossal mega-ion cannons, one to port and one to starboard, each capable of projecting an expanding wave of ion energy across an entire enemy fleet at once. Anything that wave touched was neutralized. Shields collapsed, and engines went cold in the same instant, and even life support switched off. Interestingly, this technology was not new. It was borrowed. The mega-ion cannons scaled up planetary defense ion technology, the same family of weapon the rebels would one day use to protect their base on Hoth, and turned it into an instrument of ambush. Because make no mistake, the doctrine of this ship was execution. The Malevolence would emerge from silence, fire an ion wave that rendered a Republic task force completely inert, and then leisurely tear apart the paralyzed ships with its 500 conventional turbo lasers. The victims could not fight back, could not run, and could not even call for help because their communications went down with everything else. The ship's deep space staging and communication blackouts meant that Mayday calls perished alongside the power grids. That is why the Republic lost fleet after fleet without ever getting a confirmed silhouette of the enemy. In command of all this stood General Grievous, with Count Dooku directing the terror campaign from above. The ship was the Confederacy's answer to the Republic's naval superiority, and for a stretch of 22 BBY, it was the most feared object in space. The mystery finally cracked at a place called Abrogado. Jedi Master Plo Koon took a task force out hunting the unknown weapon, and his ships were ion-blasted and torn apart. Plo Koon and a small handful of clones, including Commander Wolf, made it into escape pods. And what happened next is the moment that defines the Malevolence. Grievous sent his droids out to hunt the pods one by one, opening fire on helpless survivors drifting in open space. This is the dark side of ion warfare. The waves destroyed systems, which meant most victims were left adrift and powerless, and their ends came slowly. In-universe, the pod hunting at Abrogado was framed as a war crime. But a few pods slipped through because Anakin Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano defied standing orders and flew out to rescue Plo Koon's survivors. That rescue brought back the first eyewitness intelligence on the ship. After weeks of shadows, the Republic finally knew what it was hunting, and it finally had a weakness to look for. Then Dooku overplayed his hand. He ordered the Malevolence to attack the Khalid Shoals Medical Center, a defenseless space hospital sheltering over 60,000 wounded clone troopers. There was cold, strategic logic underneath the cruelty. Destroying the station would remove the Republic's ability to heal wounded veteran clones and return them to the war. So Dooku was targeting the Republic's most experienced manpower along with its morale. But deliberately ion-blasting a hospital marked the ship as beyond the pale even by separatist standards. And it forced the Republic into a desperate race. To beat the Malevolence to the hospital, Anakin led a bomber squadron called Shadow Squadron through a shortcut known as the Balmorra Run, a nebula infested with colossal creatures called Nebrae Mantas. And there is a detail hiding in what they were flying. Shadow Squadron flew BTLBY wings, the early, fully armored gunner turret version of the bomber. The stripped-down relics that audiences saw attack the Death Star were 20 years earlier, the absolute cutting edge of Republic hardware. Anakin's original plan was decapitation, a bombing run straight at the bridge to take out Grievous himself. Ahsoka and Plo Koon talked him out of it and convinced him to target the weapon instead. The Y-wings put their torpedoes directly into the starboard mega-ion cannon. And what followed was pure poetry. On its next discharge, the damaged cannon misfired, and the overload cascaded through the ship's systems. The fleet destroyer that specialized in catastrophic systems failure was crippled by a catastrophic systems failure of its own. The giant turned and ran for separatist space while a Republic pursuit fleet under Anakin and Obi-Wan, joined by Plo Koon, hammered it from behind and stripped away its escape options. One complication remained. During the retreat, the Malevolence captured Senator Padme Amidala. She had been lured into its path through a staged peace overture engineered by Dooku, the Confederacy using diplomacy itself as targeting data. Filed that trick away because a certain Sith Lord was watching it work, and he would run a galaxy-sized version of the same bait 2 decades later. With Padme aboard, Anakin and Obi-Wan infiltrated the crippled superweapon as it limped toward safety, giving the ship's final hours the saga's signature corridor adventure. And the finishing blow was not a broadside at all. It was a navigation trick. During the boarding action, Anakin sabotaged the ship's navicomputer. When Grievous finally ordered the jump to hyperspace, the Malevolence instead flew itself at full speed into the dead moon of Antar and was obliterated. Grievous, in his signature fashion, escaped in his starfighter and went on to fight the rest of the war. The weapon was gone, but its commander's reputation for terror survived to the very end. The story of the class did not quite end there. At least one sister ship, the Devastation, appears in Legends continuity, but the Subjugator line never regained its strategic relevance. The Republic developed counter-tactics, and the Confederacy moved its resources elsewhere. So why does a warship belong on a superweapons list at all? Because the Malevolence is the bridge between eras. It was the first modern Terra flagship, a weapon whose value was psychological as much as material. Small enough that we watched it hunt escape pods, and big enough to wipe fleets off the map. The ancient age of Force mysticism was over, and the age of industrial terror had begun. Palpatine studied the lesson closely. Within 2 decades, he would perfect the concept twice, and he would do it at the scale of a small moon. We have finally arrived at the one everybody knows, the armored sphere, the trench run, the single shot that ends a planet. You have seen this station explode 100 times, but the version of the story most people carry around starts in the middle. Because in Legends, the Death Star was not born with the Empire at all. Its paper trail begins years earlier, in the hands of the Republic it would eventually replace. The concept traces back to a starship designer named Wraith Syanar, who drew up a proposal called the Expeditionary Battle Planetoid. The insectoid Geonosians refined that concept into working schematics, and if you have watched Attack of the Clones, you have already seen the handoff without realizing it. The plans that Poggle the Lesser gives to Count Dooku in 22 BBY are the direct ancestor of the Death Star. Dooku carried them straight to his master, and from there, the project entered development under the wartime secrecy of the Republic itself, filed under the name Ultimate Weapon. Let that sink in for a moment. The Republic was funding a planet-ending superweapon while its citizens believed they were fighting a war for democracy. So when Palpatine declared himself Emperor in 19 BBY, his greatest weapon was not some new idea. It was already under construction. Where do you hide the most secret project in galactic history? You hide it somewhere no sane pilot would ever go. The design team was placed inside a facility called the Maw installation, tucked among the cluster of black holes near Kessel. And if that location sounds familiar, it should. Those are the same black holes the Celestials arranged 100,000 years earlier using Centerpoint Station, the prison built to cage Abeloth. The Empire built its future inside the leftover machinery of forgotten gods, with Grand Moff Tarkin as the project's patron. Two designers carried the weight of the work, and their stories could not be more different. The chief engineer was Bevel Lemelisk, an amoral genius who treated ending planets as a fascinating engineering puzzle. Beside him worked Kui Shooks, a brilliant Omwati scientist who was deliberately deceived into believing she was designing mining and defense technology. One of them knew exactly what he was building. The other had no idea. Both of those facts come back to haunt the galaxy later in this video. Construction consumed a world. The station was assembled in the remote Horus system, in orbit of the prison planet Despere, using penal labor alongside thousands of imprisoned Wookiees. Kashyyyk keeps surfacing in this timeline, from the Rakata seeding its forests to the Empire chaining its people to Death Star scaffolding. The finished product was an armored sphere roughly 100 miles across, crewed by well over 1 million Imperial personnel, carrying a city's worth of internal infrastructure along with its wings of TIE fighters. On any sensor readout, it registered as a small moon, and at its core sat the physics flex of the age. The super laser generated 8 tributary beams through a Kyber-focused crystal array, converging them into one composite beam powered by a hypermatter reactor with the output of a small star. A single discharge carried enough energy to overcome the binding energy of an entire planet. Decades before Rogue One made Kyber crystals famous, legends had already scaled the heart of a Jedi lightsaber into a world-ending weapon. The super laser's first full power test is a war crime the galaxy never even heard about. Tarkin ordered it fired on Despere itself, the prison world directly beneath the construction site, along with everyone still on it. The station's first victim was its own birthplace, and that act flowed from a formal ideology. Tarkin had authored a famous policy memo to the Emperor proposing that the Empire should rule through the fear of its power rather than the constant use of it. One weapon so absolute that rebellion becomes unthinkable. The Death Star was never really built to fight wars. It was built to end the concept of fighting back. The plans leaked anyway, and the cost was steep. In Legends continuity, the technical readouts were stolen through a raid on the Danuta communications facility by an agent named Kyle Katarn, the same man who would later free the trapped souls of Yuuzahn. The data passed through a doomed transmission at Toprawa before reaching Princess Leia aboard the Tantive 4. Rogue One would later tell a separate canon version of that relay. Then came the moment that defines the entire saga. In 0 BBY, to break Leia under interrogation and demonstrate his doctrine to the galaxy, Tarkin ordered the super laser fired on Alderaan, a pacifist founding world of the Republic with no planetary defenses of any kind. roughly 2 billion lives ended in under a minute, and the galaxy's reaction inverted everything Tarkin believed. Alderaan was supposed to frighten the stars into obedience. Instead, it validated the rebellion's warnings and drove neutral systems into open revolt. In a single day, the Death Star radicalized more beings than rebel recruiters had managed in 19 years. The flaw that brought it down was barely 6 feet wide. A thermal exhaust port, running from the surface trench straight to the main reactor, sat unshielded against proton torpedoes. In Legends, this was a genuine oversight in Lemelisk's design. At the Battle of Yavin, with the station minutes away from firing on the rebel base, Luke Skywalker made his run. Guided by the voice of Obi-Wan and the Force itself, with Han Solo clearing Vader off his tail at the last second, Luke put a pair of torpedoes down that port. The chain reaction consumed the station, Grand Moff Tarkin, and over 1 million Imperial personnel. Palpatine's response to the failure tells you everything about him. He had Bevel Lemelisk executed for the design flaw. Then he resurrected the engineer into a clone body and put him back to work. And then he repeated that cycle multiple times over the years, choosing a brand new method on each occasion. Lemelisk just kept working. Meanwhile, a fuse was quietly burning out at the maw. Tarkin had garrisoned the hidden installation with 4 star destroyers under Admiral Dala, his protege, and he perished at Yavin without ever transmitting the facility's existence up the chain of command. The Empire's greatest research site would spend 11 years forgotten by its own government, and what eventually crawled out of it is still waiting further down this timeline. Yavin changed the entire philosophy of superweapon design because it proved that a battle station could be brought down by starfighters. The next generation of Imperial weapons would each answer that lesson in a different way, and those answers fill the rest of this timeline. The Death Star became the measuring stick for everything before it and after it, even though its famous sphere is still dwarfed by the ancient bulk of Centerpoint Station. But its truest legacy was a lesson Palpatine took personally. One superweapon can always be lost. So, from this point forward, he made sure there was always another one already under construction. And the next one was not just bigger, it was bait. Every single piece of intelligence the rebellion stole about the second Death Star was completely accurate. The location was right. The shield dependency was real. The Emperor really was going to be aboard. And that was exactly the problem, because all of it was handed to them on purpose. The second Death Star is the only superweapon in this entire video that performed precisely as designed. And somehow it's still lost. Start with the machine itself, because it was the first station's autopsy made steel. At roughly 560 miles in diameter, it dwarfed its predecessor almost 6 times over, less a battle station than an armored dwarf planet with a projected crew and garrison in the millions. Bevel Lemelisk, freshly executed and recloned over the first station's flaw, led the redesign, and his fix for the exhaust port problem was absolute. Millions of heat dispersion ducts, each just a fraction of an inch wide, were scattered across the surface, and none of them were large enough to admit so much as a blaster bolt. The super laser was a generational leap. The new array recharged in minutes instead of the original's 24 hours, and it came with an upgrade that changed naval warfare entirely. The beam could now be traversed and fired accurately at capital ships. A weapon built to end planets had become a sniper aimed at fleets. The station was assembled in orbit of the forest moon of Endor, protected during its vulnerable construction phase by an energy shield projected up from a bunker on the surface. That single dependency would decide the galactic civil war. And the workforce floating above that moon is its own grim statistic. Legends sources describe hundreds of thousands of contractors, droids, and imprisoned laborers provisioned through the Imperial logistics web, which is why the famous pop culture debate about independent contractors working on the Death Star is actually grounded in real Legends texts. Then came the leak. Bothan spy networks obtained the station's location, its defensive posture, and the crown jewel of the entire haul: the fact that Emperor Palpatine himself would personally oversee final construction aboard. Many Bothans lost their lives getting that information out. And the cruelest twist in all of Legends is that their sacrifice delivered exactly what Palpatine wanted delivered. He had allowed the leak. The skeletal, seemingly incomplete hemisphere, the shield generator sitting on a moon, the presence of the Emperor as the ultimate prize. The entire picture was engineered to concentrate the whole Rebel Alliance fleet and its leadership in one place at one time. Remember the staged peace overture that lured Padme aboard the Malevolence. This was the same play, scaled up to decide the fate of the galaxy. The trap had teeth on both ends. Down on Endor, the shield bunker was garrisoned with an entire legion of the Emperor's best troops, far beyond anything Han Solo's strike team expected, positioned to hold exactly long enough for the space side of the trap to close. And up above, the film's most famous reveal landed. The supposedly unfinished super laser was fully armed and operational. At the Battle of Endor, it demonstrated its fleet sniping upgrade in real time, vaporizing the rebel cruiser Liberty with a single sustained shot. And Legends accounts add further capital ships to that tally. Meanwhile, a third weapon was operating in parallel, and this one had no barrel at all. The station, the fleet, and the ambush were all staged scenery for what Palpatine actually wanted, which was unfolding in the throne room. His true objective was breaking Luke Skywalker against his own father and completing the Sith succession. Among everything else it was, the 560-mile-wide station was a seduction chamber. Tarkin had ruled through fear of the weapon. Palpatine climbed inside the weapon and made himself its payload. Because by 4 ABY, his priority was no longer governing the galaxy at all. There is one more Legends detail that explains the Emperor's total confidence. His precognition and his battle meditation were actively guiding the coordination of the Imperial fleet throughout the battle. The same rare gift that once made Bastila Shan the deciding factor at the Star Forge was now flowing from the Imperial throne room. So, when Vader lifted his master and threw him down the reactor shaft, the Armada did not just lose its ruler, it lost its invisible conductor, and its sudden drop in cohesion was partly the silence where his mind used to be. The rebellion survived on a handful of hinge points. Lando Calrissian and Admiral Akbar drove the fleet point blank into the Imperial Armada, denying the super laser clean shots by tangling the two forces together. On the moon below, the Ewok uprising and Han's team finally cracked the bunker and dropped the shield. And in the throne room, Anakin Skywalker came back to himself at the last possible moment and ended his master's reign with his own hands. From there, The Finnish ran the Yavin playbook at a larger scale. Lando in the Millennium Falcon and Wedge Antilles of Rogue Squadron flew inside the exposed superstructure all the way to the main reactor. Wedge's torpedoes and the Falcon's concussion missiles detonated the core, and the escape through that collapsing tunnel became the defining flying sequence of the entire saga. The Executor went down in those same minutes, Vader's flagship stretching nearly 12 miles, its bridge rammed by an A-wing before the giant plowed bow first into the station's surface. Endor consumed the two largest military objects the Empire ever built, almost side by side. The aftermath carried edges the films never show. Legend sources debate the effects of debris and radiation on Endor's moon, a grim hypothesis that most later texts soften or push back against, and the Empire suppressed news of the loss for as long as it possibly could. The economics were brutal too. Losing both Death Stars within 4 years cost the Empire resources estimated as rivaling the output of entire sectors, a self-inflicted wound that accelerated its fragmentation into feuding warlords. And here is the stitch that ties the two battles together. At Yavin, the rebels exploited a flaw the Empire never knew existed. At Endor, the Empire exploited a flaw the rebels never knew existed: their own predictability. The student had become the teacher, and the teacher still lost. Because the trap worked, the shield held on schedule, and the super laser performed flawlessly. What defeated the second Death Star were the two variables Palpatine's doctrine could not model: a father's love and a tribe of teddy bears armed with logs. Imperial designers took a lesson from Endor, and it was a perverse one. The conclusion was never to stop building superweapons. The conclusion was to stop building superweapons that need fleets to defend them. That single idea drives the next two entries on this timeline. And there was one final secret buried under everything, the deepest one Palpatine ever kept. In Legends, the Emperor did not truly perish at Endor. As his body fell into that shaft, his spirit fled across the galaxy to a hidden throne world called Bis, into a waiting clone body. The rebellion celebrated among the trees that night, believing the war was over. The man they were celebrating about was already opening his eyes somewhere else. The galaxy spent 6 years celebrating a funeral that never actually happened. While the New Republic rebuilt and the heroes of Endor moved on with their lives, the spirit of Emperor Palpatine was resting inside a clone body on a hidden throne world called Bis, deep in the galactic core. And when he finally stepped back into the light in 10 ABY, he arrived aboard something the galaxy had never seen before. A warship painted the color of a shadow, carrying the heart of a Death Star inside its bow. This was the Eclipse, and it answered a question that only Palpatine would ever think to ask. What if the Death Star's super laser could hunt? The result was a super-star destroyer stretching nearly 11 miles from end to end, the largest conventional warship class the Empire ever fielded, with a planet-cracking axial super laser built directly into the front of the hull. Its entire design brief was written by the lessons of Endor. There would be no dependence on external shield generators, and no sitting in one vulnerable position waiting for a trench run. The firepower was so absolute that no fleet engagement was survivable for the enemy. For the first time in Imperial history, a superweapon escorted itself. Now, the axial super laser operated at only a fraction of the Death Star's full output. But look at what that fraction could still do. It could crack a planet's crust wide open. It could boil away oceans and entire atmospheres, leaving worlds permanently uninhabitable. Instead of instantly disintegrating a planet, the Eclipse ruined one beyond repair, and the distinction hardly mattered to anyone living there. The rest of the arsenal made the main gun feel almost unnecessary. The ship carried 500 heavy laser cannons alongside 550 turbo lasers. Gravity well projectors could drag fleeing ships out of hyperspace so they could never escape. Its hangars held dozens of TIE squadrons, and its holds carried full legions of ground troops with their walkers. Even the paint job was a weapon. The hull was finished in black on purpose, its silhouette designed to look like a rising shadow crawling over the horizon of a doomed world. Palpatine explicitly intended for the ship's arrival in orbit to trigger planetary surrender before a single shot was fired. The Eclipse anchored a campaign called Operation Shadowhand, the reborn Emperor's push to take back everything he had lost. Within months, the offensive smashed the New Republic's hard-won gains, forced the government to evacuate Coruscant, and briefly made the Empire whole again under one dark will. And the flagship was only the crown of a much larger arsenal. This same campaign unleashed the World Devastators at Mon Calamari, enormous machines that consumed the surfaces of worlds as raw material to manufacture fleets in real time, alongside viral dark-side terror broadcasts spreading across the galaxy. The years 10 and 11 ABY read like the Empire's apocalyptic encore tour. But the most famous scene aboard the Eclipse was never a battle. It was a temptation. Palpatine revealed himself to a captured Luke Skywalker on that ship, and Luke made the most dangerous calculation of his life. He reasoned that the dark side could only truly be destroyed from within it. So Luke Skywalker knelt, and he declared himself the Emperor's new apprentice. The gambit nearly consumed him, serving aboard the flagship as the Emperor's dark Jedi enforcer. Luke sabotaged whatever he could reach, including the precious cloning labs back on Biss. But the darkness was genuinely swallowing him the entire time. It took Leia resisting Palpatine's attempt to corrupt her as well, to pull her brother back at the decisive moment. What happened next brings this whole timeline full circle in the strangest way. In the climactic confrontation of 10 ABY, Palpatine unleashed a force storm against the rebel fleet. Legends describes these storms as self-sustaining tempests that tear open hyperspace itself, maelstroms of energy capable of scouring the surface of a planet. This was a superweapon that existed as a force power, the same category of horror as the hunger of Nihilus, or the ritual beneath Yuuzahn, channeled through a single man's rage. And it turned on him. When Luke and Leia made their combined stand in the light, Palpatine's control over the storm broke. His own creation devoured the Eclipse with the Emperor still aboard. The mightiest warship the Empire ever built was destroyed by the hand of its own master, and even that was merely an inconvenience. Palpatine's spirit fled the wreckage back to Biss and settled into yet another clone body. By this point in Legends, the resurrected Emperor was treating flagships and bodies alike as consumable supplies. A second ship was already waiting. The Eclipse II launched within the year, completed at Biss in 11 ABY, and it served as the new flagship while escorting the reborn Emperor's final and greatest weapon, a machine we are about to meet very soon. The two operated as a paired system, the shield and the spear of a resurrected god. And the way the Eclipse 2 ended is one of the greatest droid moments ever put on a page. During the New Republic's desperate raid on Bissis, R2-D2 physically jacked himself into the ship's systems. The little astromech worked its navigation and its hyperdrive, locked out the entire Imperial crew, and programmed a jump of his own choosing. The Eclipse 2 hurled itself at full speed onto a collision course with the Emperor's ultimate weapon. The Empire's two greatest instruments of terror destroyed each other in a single engineered catastrophe above Biss, and what that collision knocked loose would finish the story of the throne world itself. It is arguably the most consequential single action by an astromech droid in the entire saga. Only 2 ships of the class were ever completed. A related line of dreadnoughts, called the Sovereign class, each around 8 miles long, was never finished before the Empire's core territories collapsed. The class ended with its Emperor. And there is a long-running measuring contest among Legends fans worth settling here. At nearly 11 miles, the Eclipse actually ran shorter than the almost 12-mile Executor. But in the tonnage debates, it outmassed Vader's old flagship, second in length, first in weight, and first in sheer dread. The crews aboard made it unlike anything else in the fleet, too. Palpatine staffed the Eclipse with his dark side adepts and his elite sovereign protectors, which meant the flagship doubled as the traveling court of a dark side religion. Destroying it decapitated a navy and a faith at the same time. So what was the Eclipse, really? It was a black cathedral built by a man who refused to accept his own ending, sailing the galaxy on a resurrection tour. The Death Stars were about doctrine. The Eclipse was about one person's absolute unwillingness to let go. And notice that both hulls fell to their master's own hubris. But Palpatine had one more masterpiece left in him. Because while the Eclipse ships were hunting fleets, engineers above Biss were finishing a weapon that made every battle station before it obsolete. A weapon that never needed to travel anywhere at all. In 11 ABY, planetary governments across the galaxy began receiving a very strange kind of message. It arrived through formal diplomatic channels, written in polite official language, and it informed the recipients that a projectile was already on its way to their world. There was nothing to intercept, and nowhere to run. The message was a courtesy. Surrender processing, handled like customer service. That is the signature of the final masterpiece of Emperor Palpatine, a weapon called the Galaxy Gun. The gun was constructed in orbit of the hidden throne world Biss, designed by an Imperial engineer named Umak Leth, the Dark Empire era's answer to Bevel Lemelisk. And the concept behind it made every superweapon before it obsolete overnight. A Death Star had to travel to its victim. It had to arrive, be seen, and expose itself over the target. The Galaxy Gun never went anywhere. It fired hyperspace-capable projectiles, intelligent shielded missiles that jumped across the stars and struck any planet anywhere directly from the orbit of Biss. Its range was effectively unlimited. Every world in the galaxy was permanently within reach of a single cannon parked above the Emperor's palace. Each projectile carried a particle disintegrator warhead with an adjustable yield, and the settings read like a menu of endings. At partial power, a round could crack open a planet's crust or remove a single city with surgical spite. At full power, It triggered a chain reaction that disintegrated the entire planet down to its particles, nothing left to rebuild and nothing left to mourn over. And stopping one of these rounds in flight was essentially impossible. They were armored and shielded, and they guided themselves. Legend sources describe defensive fire against them as almost useless. The projectiles could navigate defended systems, slip past interception attempts, and choose their own approach vectors. New Republic analysts eventually concluded that the only reliable defense was making sure BIS never learned your coordinates. An entire galactic war was reduced to information hygiene. Even failure was catastrophic. One round famously malfunctioned during the campaign and failed to detonate at full yield, and it still devastated its target region. The weapon's failure state exceeded the success state of most fleets. This was the Tarkin doctrine perfected. No fleet actions, no battle station hanging vulnerable over the target, and no warning beyond that polite diplomatic note. Just an address and an execution. Palpatine could sit on his throne and delete any world whose loyalty wavered. And his first full demonstration was chosen with intensely personal spite. The projectile destroyed Dasucha 5, known as the Pinnacle Moon, the hidden headquarters of the New Republic. The base and everyone who had not evacuated in time were wiped away. That specific rock was where Mon Mothma and the entire government had sheltered from him throughout the Dark Empire campaign. His opening shot was aimed at the exact place his enemies had believed they were safe. Here is the uncomfortable truth of what happened next. The terror worked. It worked where both Death Stars had failed, with worlds being ruined by remote control and absolutely no target to counterattack. Star system after star system formally submitted to the reborn empire. Legends describes the galaxy sliding into capitulation within months. Planetary governments that had resisted 20 years of imperial pressure surrendered to a weapon most of them never even saw. Fear traveled faster than the missiles did, and the economics behind it were almost insulting. Each projectile, however sophisticated, cost a rounding error compared to a Death Star's budget. The Galaxy gun achieved galaxy-wide dread at perhaps 1,000th of the expense. Measured by strategic results per month, this is plausibly the most effective superweapon in the entire history of Legends. It came closer to actually winning than anything else on this timeline. But while the weapon was thriving, its master was falling apart. Palpatine's clone bodies were failing one after another, quietly sabotaged by members of his own court. His desperation turned into a hunt for a new host, and it led him to one of the darkest moments in all of Star Wars. The Emperor attempted to possess the infant Anakin Solo, the newborn son of Han and Leia. The resurrection cycle that had carried him past Endor was unraveling in real time, and the events of Empire's end in 11 Uby closed in around him. The end of the Galaxy gun came from inside its own escort, because there was no way to fly at this weapon and win. It happened during the New Republic raid on BIS, in the moment we already witnessed. R2-D2 jacked into the Eclipse 2, seized the helm and the hyperdrive, and rammed the 11-mile dreadnought straight into the Galaxy gun. The Empire's two ultimate weapons destroyed each other in one droid-engineered collision, and the wreckage completed the apocalypse. The impact knocked the gun's final loaded projectile free, and the errant round was seized by the gravity of BIS itself. The particle disintegrator detonated against the Imperial throne world. BIS was consumed entirely. Its dark side academies, its cloning vaults, and the billions of soldiers and citizens garrisoned there were all swallowed by the very weapon built to protect them. Read that symmetry back, because it is the whole Dark Empire arc in miniature. The machine designed to disintegrate the Emperor's enemies disintegrated his capital, his clone reserves, and the material heart of his resurrection engine. Palpatine's final superweapon carried out his final execution. The man himself met his true ending in that same campaign. Hunted out of his last clone body, Palpatine's spirit tried to flee one more time. A gravely wounded Jedi named Gios Brand, in his own last moments, seized the Emperor's essence and dragged it with him into oblivion. And with that, the Sith lineage that began in a cave beneath Yuuzahn 1,000 years earlier, the line running from Darth Bane all the way down through Darth Sidious, finally reached its end in Legends. It started with a ritual and ended with a sacrifice. The technology perished alongside its maker. With Bis gone and Umak-Leth lost in the cataclysm, the hyperspace projectile concept had no successor, and the threats that came later returned to platform-based designs. Take stock of what this weapon accomplished in under a single year of operation. It destroyed an inhabited moon base and a core capital world, coerced the submission of enormous stretches of the galaxy, and did it all without a dramatic disarray or a trench for anyone to run. The Galaxy Gun was destruction as pure administration, a bureaucracy processing target coordinates. That is exactly why it may be the scariest entry on this whole list. And yet, in that very same year, the deadliest weapon of the era was not sitting in orbit of Bis at all. It was hiding inside a cluster of black holes in a forgotten laboratory the Empire itself had lost track of, and it was small enough to fit in a hangar. The Death Star asked a frightening question. What happens when a government holds ultimate power? The Sun Crusher asked a far worse one. What happens when one grieving teenager holds it instead? The answer to that second question is the darkest single moment in this entire video, and it begins in a place we already know very well. Remember the fuse that started burning the day Grand Moff Tarkin fell at Yavin? He had hidden his secret research facility, the Maw installation, inside the cluster of black holes near Kessel, guarded by 4 Star Destroyers under his protégé, Admiral Dala. Then he perished without ever telling his superiors the place existed. For over a decade, Dala kept guarding it without orders, and the scientists inside kept working without oversight. In 11 ABY, the galaxy finally found out what they had built in there, and it broke every rule of superweapon design at once. The Sun Crusher was barely the size of a starfighter, small enough for a crew you could count on one hand. After 100,000 years of weapons growing larger and larger, the most dangerous machine of the age could park inside a hangar. Its hull made it effectively invulnerable. Layers of quantum crystalline armor rendered the ship immune to essentially all conventional weapons. And the most famous demonstration of that fact sounds made up. The Sun Crusher was flown straight through the superstructure of a Star Destroyer and came out the other side intact. But the armor was only half the nightmare. The weapon itself did not target planets at all. It targeted entire systems. The ship launched resonance torpedoes directly into a star, destabilizing its core and triggering a supernova. The blast consumed every planet and moon in the system, along with any station or ship unlucky enough to be there. One torpedo meant one ended solar system, and the designer's tragedy repeated itself in the cruelest way. Qui Shux, the brilliant Omwati scientist, who had been deceived into building the Death Star's systems, was manipulated into perfecting the Sun Crusher too, once again believing her work had peaceful applications. Her slow, horrified realization of what she had actually created became the conscience of this whole era. The weapon surfaced when three unlikely visitors stumbled into the maw. Han Solo and Chewbacca, along with a young Force-sensitive prisoner from the Kessel spice mines named Kyp Durron, wandered straight into the hidden installation while it was still operating in secret under Dala. Their escape changed everything. Han's group stole the Sun Crusher itself and punched out of the maw through Dala's fleet, delivering to the New Republic a weapon it was genuinely terrified to possess. And the debate that followed is the quiet horror of this story. Serious voices inside the Republic argued for keeping the Sun Crusher as a deterrent. Only the insistence of the Jedi, who warned that some capabilities corrupt whoever owns them, forced the government's hand. The Republic came within a conversation of becoming the very thing it had spent 2 Death Stars fighting. Since nothing in the galaxy could destroy the indestructible, they settled for burying it. The Sun Crusher was entombed in the crushing core of the gas giant Yavin, with secrecy and atmosphere doing the job that no weapon could. And orbiting directly overhead, on the moon of Yavin 4, sat Luke Skywalker's brand new Jedi Academy. The ghost waiting on that moon connects this story back 4,000 years. The spirit of Exar Kun, the Sith Lord who had once unleashed the Dark Reaper, still lingered in the temples of Yavin 4. And in Luke's most gifted student, Kun found a perfect instrument. Because Kyp Durron was carrying real wounds. The Empire had destroyed his childhood, imprisoning his family, and shipping his brother Zeth off to the brutal Stormtrooper Academy on the world of Karida. Kun's whispers poured straight into those grievances. Under the dark spirit's influence, Kyp reached down into the core of the gas giant with the Force and pulled the Sun Crusher back out through sheer telekinetic will. What followed is the darkest fallen student arc in Legends. Wielding the untouchable ship, Kyp burned through Imperial holdings across the galaxy. And then he came to Karida, the seat of the Empire's military academy. At the final moment before firing, Kyp learned that his brother might still be alive on the surface. He launched the resonance torpedo anyway. The supernova consumed the Academy world and everyone in the system. And in the story's cruelest stroke, Zeth Durron was among the lost. Kyp glimpsed his brother at the end and could not save him. A student of Luke Skywalker had just committed one of the largest single atrocities in the history of Legends. And Kyp was not even the only one burning the galaxy that year. Admiral Dala had erupted out of the maw on a scorched galaxy campaign of her own, and in a gambit at the Cauldron Nebula, Kyp detonated multiple stars at once to destroy her flagship group. Measured in stellar destruction, 11 ABY stands as the single densest year in all of Legends. The redemption came through emptiness. On Yavin 4, Luke's students acted together and destroyed the spirit of Exar Kun. And the moment Kun's hold broke, Kyp collapsed under the weight of what he had done. Hollowed out, he surrendered himself and the Sun Crusher to Republic justice, and the disposal finally answered the question that had haunted everyone from the start. The only thing in the galaxy capable of destroying the Sun Crusher was the maw itself. Kyp personally flew the weapon into one of the cluster's black holes, and the indestructible ship crossed the event horizon into oblivion, with Kyp himself escaping by the narrowest of margins. Here is the part of his story that Legends never lets you forget. Kip was never executed and never expelled. He returned to the Jedi path, and decades later, he served as a Jedi Master on the High Council through the galaxy's most desperate war. Legends planted its flag on a hard argument. Even system-scale sin does not put a person beyond redemption. The Maw itself had more monsters in its inventory. Designs found there shared their conceptual DNA with the world devastators, the city-sized machines that consumed planetary surfaces to manufacture fleets in real time. Essentially mobile carnivorous descendants of the ancient Starforge until Luke corrupted their control codes at Calamari. The Maw was the Pandora's box of legends, and the Sun Crusher was the first thing that escaped it. As for Dala, the keeper of that box outlived every weapon she guarded. She went on to unite the Imperial warlords, bombard Yavin 4, and decades later, remarkably, serve as Chief of State of the entire Galactic Alliance. With the Sun Crusher gone, the great age of Imperial superweapons was finally closing. The engineers were scattered, the Emperor was truly gone, and the blueprints were ash. Which meant the next person to attempt a super laser would not be an Emperor at all. He would be a crime lord with a stolen set of plans and a very tight budget. In 12 ABY, someone broke into the New Republic archives on Coruscant and walked out with the original Death Star plans. It was not some Imperial remnant, and it was not a vengeful admiral. It was a Hutt. The crime lord Durga Besadi Tai had looked at a century of galactic history and reached a perfectly criminal conclusion. If governments could own planet-ending weapons, then so could organized crime. And what followed is the strangest chapter in the entire history of superweapons, the moment the apocalypse went discount. Durga's design philosophy was pure Hutt economics. Why build the station at all? The Darksaber stripped the Death Star concept down to its profitable essence, the super laser and nothing else, housed in a long cylindrical hull that was shaped fittingly like the handle of a lightsaber. There would be no garrison and no internal city, and not a single TIE fighter wing, just the gun. And to build it, Durga hired the most executed man in the galaxy. Bevel Lemelisk, designer of both Death Stars, put to work and then repeatedly put to a fresh ending by Palpatine, was now a fugitive selling doomsday expertise to the highest bidder. His asking price had collapsed, and so had his standards. The business model behind the project was extortion at planetary scale. Worlds would pay the Hutts, or they would watch something disappear. Maybe a city, maybe an entire moon. Durga had taken the Tarkin doctrine, the philosophy of ruling through fear of one absolute weapon, and converted it into a subscription protection racket. There was even a genuine mob war underneath it all. Durga's Besadi clan pursued the Darksaber partly to leapfrog the rival Desilogic clan, Jabba's old organization, which had been leaderless since 4 ABY. Out of 14 entries on this timeline, this is the only superweapon built as a move in a criminal succession fight. The construction site was picked for concealment. The Darksaber was assembled in secret inside the Hoth asteroid field, the same lethal debris belt made famous in The Empire Strikes Back, with the asteroid serving as both cover and raw material. The paperwork claimed it was all legitimate asteroid mining, and the usual jurisdictional fog of Hutt space kept New Republic inspectors at arm's length. Organized crime was exploiting exactly the same oversight gaps that had once let the Empire build in the dark. So far, this all sounds frighteningly competent. And then we meet the workforce. Assembly was performed by a species called the Tauril, small multi-armed creatures who shared a single hive mind. The problem was that the hive was curious to a fault. Whenever anything interesting drifted past the construction site, a passing comet or an unusual ship, 10,000 workers turned their heads at the same instant. Then the Overmind would resume the job with entire structural sections transposed. Lemelisk discovered whole decks that had been built mirror reversed, and the corner cutting went all the way down. Durga sourced cut-rate components through black market suppliers and scrap dealers, and Lemelisk's specifications were value-engineered at every single stage. The chief designer privately understood exactly what was taking shape out there in the asteroid field. His masterpiece was becoming a lemon. But the New Republic could not afford to laugh, and neither should we. A super laser in criminal hands, even a shoddy one, triggered a full crisis response, and it came at the worst possible moment, running parallel to an Imperial resurgence at Orinda and a dangerous military buildup by a species called the Yevatha. The infiltration mission fell to a familiar face. General Krix Madine, the man who had briefed the strike teams before the Battle of Endor, personally led New Republic commandos into the Hoth field to sabotage the project from within. And this is where the comedy stops cold. Madine was captured mid-sabotage. He was brought before Durga aboard the very weapon he had just crippled, and he refused to beg. Durga ended his life right there on the Darksaber, and the New Republic task force arrived minutes too late to save him. One of the heroes of the rebellion was gone, taken by a weapon that would never work a single day in its existence. That is the sting hiding inside this whole farce. Even a failed superweapon costs the galaxy something irreplaceable. The end came almost immediately, and it played out like the punchline the project deserved. Pursued by New Republic forces through the asteroid field, Durga ordered his great super laser fired for the very first time. The weapon fizzled. All those recycled components and all that distracted Tauril craftsmanship delivered a dim, useless flicker instead of a world-ending beam. And then geology finished the job. Maneuvering through the field, the Darksaber drifted between two colossal asteroids. Rocks the novel treats as almost comically ordinary, and the budget Death Star was slowly and completely crushed with Durga and his entire court aboard. No trench run and no chosen one, just two big rocks. Lemelisk outlived his final creation by very little. Captured by the New Republic, the 4 times executed engineer was put on trial for his role in the atrocities of both Death Stars. And at the end, in a moment of dark professionalism, he offered his captors a suggestion about the method, advising them to do it properly this time, because his previous employer never quite managed it. The sentence was carried out a final and permanent time. Step back and look at his career, because it maps the entire Imperial superweapon age onto one biography. The first Death Star, brought down by his flawed exhaust port. The second, perfected and then orphaned at Endor, a string of side projects for Tarkin. And finally, a discount superlaser for a gangster. Each project smaller in vision than the last, tracking the Empire's own decay from grand doctrine down to simple graft. The Darksaber also quietly closed a bloodline. It was the last serious attempt in Legends to build a weapon from the Death Star's super laser lineage. The design DNA that began with Geonosian schematics changing hands in 22 BBY ended 34 years later as crushed scrap floating in the Hoth asteroid field. The old age of superweapons was exhausted. The gods were gone, the Emperor was gone, and even the copycats were being flattened by rocks. The galaxy allowed itself to believe the era of world-ending weapons was finally over. It was wrong, because a few years later, ships began appearing at the edge of known space. They did not come from any Imperial shipyard, and they did not come from this galaxy at all. And their superweapons were never built in the first place. They were grown. For the first time in this entire story, the Jedi felt nothing coming. In 25 ABY, ships crossed into known space from outside the galaxy itself, and the greatest early warning system civilization had ever relied on did not register them. The invaders were called the Yuuzahn Vong, and they existed outside the perception of the Force entirely. No danger sense could anticipate them. No mind trick could touch them. Legends would later explain this blindness through the Vong's severed connection to the Force after the loss of their own living homeworld. But in the moment, all the galaxy knew was that the Jedi were fighting deaf and blind for the first time in their history. And the Vong rewrote the superweapon rulebook on arrival. Their entire technology base was biological. Everything they used was grown and bred, shaped from living organisms, because to the Vong, machines themselves were blasphemy. Their foundational superweapon was not even a device. It was a tactic with a name. Yuuzahn's core turned gravity itself into a planet ender. A living gravity-manipulating organism called a Dovin Basal would be seeded onto a target world, where it locked onto the planet's own moon and dragged it down out of orbit. The name honors the warrior Yuuzahn, who first used the technique to crack the world Ixir during a Vong civil war called the Kremlevian War. Yuuzahn's victory in that conflict unified the Vong and launched their generation's long crossing toward our galaxy. The tactics demonstration here opened the war with the most famous loss in the entire saga. At the world of Cernpidal in 25 ABY, a Dovin Basal codenamed Tuskart seized the moon Dobido and began pulling it down onto the heavily populated planet below. During the desperate evacuation, Chewbacca fought to save Han's youngest son, Anakin Solo, and got him aboard. Chewbacca himself was left on the surface as the moon came down. He was the first core film hero ever lost in Legends, and the publishers chose that moment deliberately, announcing to every reader that this war would carry permanent consequences. Cernpidal also set the tone for everything that followed. A whole world was destroyed by nothing more than orbital mechanics. There was no beam to dodge, no reactor to sabotage, and no exhaust port waiting at the end of a trench. You cannot trench run a falling moon. The Dovin Basal scaled from superweapon down to standard equipment. The same organisms served as engines for Vong vessels and could rip the shields right off New Republic ships in combat. They generated miniature singularities that swallowed incoming proton torpedoes and drank laser fire before it ever connected. That single trick forced the New Republic to reinvent fleet gunnery on the fly developing stutter-fire weapons and jamming techniques in a running arms race. The best sustained depiction anywhere in legends of military doctrine evolving against a superweapon in real time. The Vong fleet itself was a superweapon by sheer tonnage. Their world ships were thousand-year-old living vessels miles across, carrying entire populations through the void, while warships like the Malachor and Supreme Commander Tsavong La's massive flagship line, the Sunulok, fought fleets conventionally as Dovan Basal's bent gravity around their hulls. And coordinating it all was an organism that earned its own place in this arsenal. The Yamosk, known as the War Coordinator, was a colossal telepathic creature that synchronized entire Vong fleets into a single unified battle mind. It was so decisive that New Republic strategy reorganized itself around hunting Yamasks down. The opening year of the invasion reads like a wound that never stops widening. Cern Pidal was crushed. Ithor, the garden world of the galaxy, was poisoned outright by bioweapon bombardment. Worlds like Dubrilion and Dantooine were overrun. The great library of Obroa Sky was captured, and refugee flows numbering in the trillions destabilized every government the fighting had not even reached yet. The front itself was the superweapon, everywhere at once. Then came 27 ABY, and Yogundi's core performed at the scale of a civilization. The Vong hurled captured refugee ships against the planetary shields of Coruscant, then used Dovan Basals to wrench at the capital's own moons and rain orbital infrastructure down onto the surface. The galactic capital fell. And what the Vong did next was a quieter kind of horror. Coruscant was violently terraformed, Vong-formed, into a replica of their lost homeworld and renamed Yuuzahn. This was their invisible weapon all along. Worlds the Vong claimed were biologically overwritten, their cities dissolved by organic agents, and their ecosystems replaced wholesale. The planet survived while everything that made it a home was erased. Facing extinction, the galaxy built a last resort of its own, and it was the darkest weapon anyone had proposed in 100,000 years. Alpha Red was a synthetic bioagent developed by Galactic Alliance intelligence under Diff Score, with assistance from the Chises, engineered to wipe out the entire Yuuzahn Vong species along with everything grown from their biotechnology. Total xenocide, contained in a vial. The proposal split the galaxy's heroes down the middle. Luke Skywalker and the Jedi opposed deploying a species-ending weapon even against invaders responsible for suffering beyond counting, the starkest ethics debate in all of Legends. The first sample was sabotaged and delayed through the intervention of a being named Verger, though a later strain was field-tested on the captured world of Kalula. What actually ended the war was not a weapon at all. In 29 ABY, a living, hyperspace-capable, fully sentient planet called Zonama Sekot returned to the galaxy. Sekot was a seed partner of the Vong's own lost living homeworld, and its revelation shattered Vong theology at the root. The invasion surrendered, and the survivors were settled on Sekot itself to depart the galaxy in peace. And Zonama Sekot had appeared in Legends once before. In the novel Rogue Planet, Set in 29 BBY, a young Anakin Skywalker bonded with the living world. The gentlest superweapon in this entire timeline knew the darkest one when he was still a boy, 54 years before it pacified the Vong. The final tally is almost impossible to hold in your head. Legend sources place the war's toll at roughly 365 trillion lives, orders of magnitude beyond every Death Star discharge, every galaxy gun projectile, and every Sun Crusher torpedo combined. The superweapon responsible was an entire civilization operating as one, and the war's endgame kept running through the oldest machinery in existence. Vong ships were tested against the black holes of the Maw. Centerpoint Station fired its last catastrophic shot at Fondor against the Vong fleet, tearing through friend and enemy alike one final time. Even the invaders' gravity technology eerily mirrored the world puller itself. After 100,000 years of building bigger and bigger guns, the galaxy was nearly ended by a species that considered machines an offense against the gods, and it was saved by a planet that was alive. The history of Star Wars superweapons ends exactly where it began, with gravity and with gods.